Hi, I'm Tony. This is Dave. We're here at Little Wars TV today to do a rules review of Nam from Battlefront.
Yeah, the NOM rules are a reprint of a previous set of rules that have been combined together. It was published in 2018 by Battlefront and Osprey Publishing, and it's about 230 pages of full-color glory.
We're going to score these games in 5 categories. The categories are weighted. The first category would be presentation, followed by playability, mechanics, flavor for the period, and support. Dave, would you like to start us off by talking about presentation?
Sure. Presentation. So this is as I said, 230 pages of full-color, highly polished wargaming rule set. The layout of the book is you get about 60 pages of clearly laid out rules with nice photography of like in-game examples of rules. And then there's a section on army lists. The army lists cover the Americans, they cover Anzac, they cover Arvin, they cover all the different Vietnamese troops that fought during the course of the war. And then you get about 15 pages of missions and special rules. And then there's painting guides at the end, and my favorite, an index.
There is a table of contents and an index, which it would seem to be elementary, but surprisingly, one or the other, or sometimes even both of these, are quite frequently missing from wargame rules. So, based on your assessment of the presentation, how did you score it?
I gave it a 9 for presentation. There are a few cut and paste errors in it, and I actually had the original copies of the different rule books, and when they combined it together into this one book, unfortunately they had to leave some of the material out that I kind of missed in this. But I do have to say that this book is all you need to buy for Nam. Instead of buying extra supplements, this is the rules, it's the army lists, it's the missions. It literally is everything that you need to play the game.
I find the book beautiful to look at. There are painting guides. Every single page has at least one and sometimes multiple pictures of the miniatures painted up, oftentimes in some tabletop setting. It is gorgeous to look at. It's well laid out. There are army lists galore. The whole thing is really, really well done in terms of presentation. It's on glossy paper. It's a hardback book. I gave it a 9 as well, which then brings us to playability. In playability, we want to talk about the barrier to entry. Is it figure intense? Are the rules complex to learn? And some of that will also be discussed in mechanics. In terms of playability, I gave it a 6. I feel that it is above average in terms of playability. It's easy to understand. It's well laid out. I don't know that there's anything particularly remarkable in the way the rules are written to make it just drop in and start gaming, but I don't feel that there are any barriers. Probably the biggest barrier for new gamers is that compared to some of the stuff, especially with the trend towards skirmish gaming, this requires a little bit larger figure count, which some people, I don't think either of us, but some people may find that a deterrent.
As far as playability, you're going to find that this set of rules is geared for what we would call matched play. You create an army list using points. The games themselves are really designed to be played on a 4x6 board, and the game length is about 2 to 3 hours, so it's easily playable in an evening. You mentioned about the barrier to entry for buying miniatures, that it's not a skirmish game. And you are correct. But because it's point-based, you can play any point level you want. So you could very easily start with a smaller 50-point game and work your way up as you paint figures. The nice thing for me as far as playability goes is that once you've read these rules, and to be honest, these rules are very similar to Team Yankee. So if you've played Team Yankee or Flames of War, this is going to be an extremely familiar set of rules for you. But once you've read the rules, you can literally play this game without ever opening that book using just a 2-page quick reference sheet. And I hate to say it because I don't feel that I'm that old, but as I age, I kind of like rule sets that I don't have to hurt my brain with.
The next category we talk about, game mechanics. And when we discuss game mechanics, we're looking at, are there any mechanics that are particularly innovative? Are there any mechanics that are particularly clunky that would slow gameplay or be difficult to grasp? And Dave, why don't you start us out here?
Okay. From a mechanics point of view, Nom, like their other games, is a D6 rule set. It basically is an I go, you go rule set, which for a lot of people, maybe they don't like that. But it's pretty standard in this genre. And every single troop type in here is given a courage rating and a skill rating. And then you basically go through a turn sequence. And the turn sequences are laid out with a starting step where you make morale tests, you reveal your ambushes, you call in airstrikes and your reserves. Then you go to the movement step. There's, like the newer versions of Flames of War and Team Yankee, there are movement orders that you can use strategically to move your troops a little bit more or do some sneaky stuff. Then there's the shooting step. And in the shooting step, there's one thing in there. The infantry get saving throws. And it's a core mechanic in there. But what I find is that if you have someone who's an incredibly lucky dice roller, in D6 games, it can really skew your expected results. The kind of counter to that is in this version of Nom, they actually have put in something where artillery, if you have a repeat bombardment, it actually forces infantry to reroll all their successful saves. So the Americans, for instance, have large amounts of artillery, and not only can it pin the enemy, but if you can hammer those Vietnamese units on a regular basis with that repeat bombardment, those infantry saves will pretty much disappear. The last part of the game is an assault step. You get defensive fire against charging units, and then the assaults themselves are particularly bloody. You keep fighting, counterattacking until one unit breaks off or is eliminated. From the mechanics point of view, I would say that one of the things that I don't like is the fact that there is no real friction, and so your units always do what you want them to do. And there's also no overwatch, which I know is a pet peeve of yours.
How did you score it in terms of mechanics?
I scored it a 7.
Ah, okay. Well, I don't find there to be any particularly innovative mechanics. It is, as you pointed out, derivative of Flames of War and Team Yankee. So if you're familiar with that, you're familiar with this. There is, as Dave pointed out, there are a couple of things that I find annoying. The lack in a modern game of opportunity fire or reaction fire, something where I can interrupt movement and shoot at troops, is just, I find that bothersome.
Yeah, the only case of that would be with charges. But
Right.
Other than that, it is lacking.
Right. Otherwise, it's just not there, and it should be. I think the saves for everything generate some excessive dice rolling on the table. I get saves in certain conditions. That's a nice mechanic to allow for cover and whatnot without having a bunch of modifiers. And in a D6 system, you can only have a couple of modifiers, let's be honest. I don't find anything in the game mechanics that is awful or abhorrent or unnatural, but it's not revolutionary, and so therefore I'm just going to give it an average score, and I'm going to give it a 5. Next category would be flavor. Flavor, we want to talk about, does it feel like you're playing the role that you're assigned by the rules? If the rules assume you're a corps commander, Do you feel like you're making core commander decisions? Also, does it help in your mind to reinforce the genre, the period that you're playing in? I find that while there are some mechanics that make it feel like Vietnam, we talked earlier about Charlie Owns the Night, guerrilla fighters. The guerrilla fighters thing I like. I've seen a similar mechanic used in a couple of other games where you can bring reinforcements on into the middle of the fight, which is nice and can be used as a good surprise. I don't know that there's anything particularly to add a flavor to it. And part of my reasoning there is that this is, as you alluded to earlier, this is a game for points-based combat. And I think it falls down trying to do scenario-based games. And because I tend to be a scenario player as opposed to a points player, the fact that it starts to run out of steam while you're trying to do scenario play kind of takes some of the flavor away from the Vietnam War. There are some special rules, but as a whole, I don't know that that is enough to really make it stand out head and shoulders above other Vietnam games in terms of flavor. So once again, I gave it an average score of a 5.
Okay. For me, historical flavor is represented a couple of different ways in this rule set. You're going to find that the army lists that they have in this book are fairly extensive. You can field air mobile, armored cav, mech infantry, marine rifles, riverine assault troops. You can have ARVN. There's like 3 types of ARVN that you can field. There's ANZAC troops. There's the NVA. There's the Viet Cong. You've got sappers coming through the wire. So they do give you a lot of different forces to use. But as you mentioned, there are special rules in here. One of the rules is triage and medevac, which basically encourages, if not requires, the Americans or any of the Western powers to evacuate their troops. And if you can bring helicopters in and evacuate your wounded using your medics, then those casualties do not count against your units as far as breakpoints. So the Americans who are always outnumbered, it really behooves them to get those troops on those choppers and get them to safety so that their units don't accrue, all of those casualties and end up breaking.
And that was for me the single standout thing in the game in terms of flavor, and I think in terms of mechanics, that they made it incumbent upon the American player to evacuate his wounded. And that does add to the experience, but I think the army lists themselves, while there's a variety of them, because we're a D6 based game, there's only so much differentiation in terms of gameplay between some of the units.
Yep. So for me, the historical flavor, I actually gave it a 7. So that brings it to support.
It does. It brings us to support. We want to talk about how well the manufacturer does in keeping up to date with errata and updates to quick references. Are there scenarios? Is there some helpful place to go when we have questions about the rules? For me, support with NAM is a conundrum in that Battlefront is one of the historical game companies that I look to and think, here's people who know how to do support. Not only do they have a well laid out website with lots of information and painting tips for practically every miniature they make, there's a huge community of players and referees and people who are discussing issues of play and new scenarios and new ideas until we get to NAM. And NAM kind of occupies, I don't know, would you say like a backwater corner of the Battlefront Flames of War website? Given that they have always been the gold star, they're a 9 In this case, they've let us down a little bit. And this is a period where I think there's a lot of room for gaming, and there's not a lot of support here. It's not bad, but it's only meh. I give it a 5.
So when it comes to support from me, a couple of things. So how do you get to the NOM website? There's actually a really tiny link in the Flames of War website that takes you to their other games, like Fate of a Nation, NOM, and a couple of other ones. So you have to know kind of where to find it. And once you find it, that website has not been updated a lot. I think maybe like there's an article or two a year. And so, I hate to say it's neglected, but it does kind of feel that way. Team Yankee and Flames of War tend to be their flagship games, and NOM just kind of exists on the fringe, in my opinion. So the website, it also houses a separate store. So whereas you would go to the Flames of War website to buy Flames of War miniatures, and it's very easy to find that and Team Yankee, if you want to buy the NOM stuff, you actually have to go to this NOM page and order from a separate website. It's like a whole separate shopping cart. And unfortunately, because I don't think it's a huge seller, oftentimes that stuff is out of stock. Even before the pandemic and COVID and supply chain issues, there were always things that were out of stock. And where you walk into a local gaming store and you can see Team Yankee and you can see Flames of War stuff on the wall, impulse purchase, you don't find that with the NOM stuff. You really have to make an effort to go and order it and hope that it's in stock. There is a QRS, but it's kind of buried on the website. I had to go digging for it. And there is an FAQ that was done by Battlefront. Phil Yates did it, but it was last updated in 2018.
Yeah.
So for me, I gave it a 6 on support. It's a rule set for me that is, it's a game. It's a game I enjoy. It's not a simulation, and I know what I'm getting when I play it, and I do enjoy it.
I too find it a game, and that's not a bad thing. There are lots of games. Some of them are quite good. Some of them are substandard. This, I believe, is kind of middle of the road. I don't know that there's anything particularly innovative about it. Again, the book is gorgeous. I can't stress that enough. The book is gorgeous, but in terms of interesting mechanics, ease of play, flavor, support, it's kind of middle of the road. And I think my score reflects that. My overall score is a 57, which is an average, slightly above average game. There's nothing bad about the game, but there's nothing that makes me say, wow. And you?
For me, if I did my math correctly, because I messed up the last one, I ended up giving it a 77, which actually is a little bit lower than the Flames of War rules that I reviewed, Miles. And I'll tell you, the reason that was because of the support. Like that, the support for Flames of War is up here, and for NOM, it's much lower. So that's where it kind of hurt it for me. But again, for me, a 77 is still an enjoyable game.
All the leaves are brown.